TNA. What can I say about TNA? What can I say about TNA? I have a lot to say, actually. 2 weeks ago, I gave up on Impact halfway through the show, as many of you know. It was during the Dixie Carter MVP segment. I just could not take it anymore, and I stopped watching. Last week, I didn't even watch Impact. I just didn't have the time. And after that other show, I didn't see any reason to go out of my way to watch it. So I didn't. But I did say that I wasn't giving up on this show yet. I'm not swearing it off just yet. Partially because I have tickets to a show later this month, and I'll get into that in a second. I had every intention of getting back to the show, though, this week, and I did. Boy, was that a mistake. This was an awful show. And you know, I was thinking about this. These shows have been in the can for weeks now, just weeks and weeks. And next week is tape 2, okay? And they have their pay-per-view coming up on the 15th. And looking back at the last month or so of TV, I've come to the realization that these most recent tapings they did were quite possibly the worst collection of tapings in the history of professional wrestling. Every show has been progressively worse than the one before it. Believe it or not, when the Menagerie first debuted, I liked him. I liked the act. Now, shit. The heel authority figure stuff is unbearable. The amount of talking on these shows. People are going to bitch about Raw, and they're going to say, well, WWE does the same thing. You know what? At least on Raw, most weeks, I know that we're going to get some good wrestling. Sometimes great wrestling. Maybe less so now with the Shield broken up and Daniel Bryan on the shelf, but I can usually count on that. You rarely get that anymore on this show. At one time you did, but now you don't. Even the matches you think would be great, like Joe and Aries, or Eddie Edwards against Davey Richards. Whether it's the empty arena that they're performing in front of, seemingly, if it's the announcers, I don't know what it is. But even those matches are not enjoyable. They're not fun. They lack any sense of purpose, any sense of drama. And I'm sure I'll get people who are going to say, well, if you don't like it, don't watch it. It's like the idiots who say, America, love it or leave it. You know, were it not for this podcast, at this point, I would not be watching Impact anymore. I would not have said that a few months ago. I started watching the full episodes 2 years ago because I genuinely started to enjoy the show. There was some kind of change that happened. Russo had left. Pritchard had been brought in. So in terms of the creative stuff, that was the big change that was made. Was it that? Was it something else? I don't know. And I think over on Raw at the time, it was John Cena against Big Johnny, John Laurinaitis, and that was like the big storyline on Raw. But last week may have been the first show I missed in 2 years. Now, I watch it because people enjoy the reviews on this podcast. And not just for the comedy, but because some people really do want to get caught up on what's going on in TNA without having to watch it themselves. Shit, I don't blame them. So I'm going to one of the New York City tapings at the end of this month with Brian Blade. We're going to the Manhattan Center, upstairs, to watch Impact be taped. I'm guessing 2 episodes, but I don't know what their plan is. I paid money, okay, good money, to go to this show. They need to knock these shows out of the fucking park. They need to load them up. They got to give the crowd what they want. You know, based on what went down on the House of Hardcore show on Friday night with Tommy Dreamer claiming that Dixie Carter pulled Bully Ray from the show, and I'm going to get you back, bitch, and everybody should go tweet Dixie about what a bitch she is. Clearly they're doing an angle. I don't buy any of this. Wouldn't shock me to see them do some sort of invasion at the New York City tapings, and maybe have Dreamer even help Bully finally put Dixie through a table. They've been building that up for months. I don't know if that's the answer to their problems. But they've got to try something. I said this on Facebook. It's inconceivable to me that there were 993,000 homes that saw this show on Thursday night. It was their lowest rating in 6 months, but that's still almost 1 million people. Despite all of the money problems, all of the talent that they've lost, everything, despite it all, TNA is the luckiest promotion in the world. Because you go back 10, 15 years, if any other wrestling company put on the kind of shows that they've been putting on lately, they would have been canceled. In a heartbeat. Done. Finished. But Spike has such shit programming on their network, and fucking hours of Cops reruns, they're probably going to keep TNA around. I predict that Impact ends up staying exactly where it is. But yeah, I listen to AJ Styles on Chris Jericho's podcast politely bury the company, although he wasn't as kind to John Gaborik, who's the head of talent relations now. They brought him over from WWE. Big John from Tough Enough, he's pretty much running a lot of different things behind the scenes, I guess, in terms of talent relations and creative, and AJ was not as kind to him on the show. But, I listened to him, and it only reinforced the fact that these people don't have a fucking clue what they're doing. It's astonishing to me that they've lasted as long as they have. 12 years they've survived. ECW didn't even last that long. They've had more of a lasting, impact, I guess, no pun intended, on the wrestling business. People remember ECW fondly back in the day, but they had money issues, and they went out of business. And it's astonishing to me that TNA is still around. MVP, Kenny King, Bobby Lashley, they're out there at the beginning of the show on Thursday, making a match between Samoa Joe and Austin Aries, where the loser is fired from TNA. If I were those guys, I'd have taken a double countout and walked my ass back to Ring of Honor. Now keep in mind that in a backstage segment later in the show, MVP confronted Brian Hebner, the referee for the match, and told him in no uncertain terms that tonight there must be a winner and there must be a loser. Fast forward to the match, the fans didn't care about any of it, which tells you how much they buy into these loser gets fired stipulations. They wrestle for 5 minutes, and Eric Young comes down to the ring. He pulls Hebner out of the ring. He tells Hebner he doesn't have to do this, but Hebner insists, I have no choice, I have a family to feed. Bully Ray comes down, he says, I'm sorry, bro, and he decks Hebner, knocks him out. MVP and his crew make their way out, and this is the part where Bully proposes they have an 8-man tag team match pitting Bully, EY, Joe, and Aries against MVP, Kenny King, Bobby Lashley, and EC3. And then Eric Young suggests they make it an 8-man tag team First Blood match. Why? Why not? MVP was going to say no, but Kenny King grabs the mic, got a little overzealous, and he accepted the match on their behalf, which made MVP very angry. He's the director of wrestling operations. He's throwing his weight around on this show every single week. Why can't he just overrule what Kenny King just said and say, no, we're not doing the match? That was dumb. As was the fact that we got no finish to a match that MVP himself said must have a winner. So we have another heel authority figure who makes stipulations and doesn't enforce them. We had Willow beating Bram by DQ when Magnus, the Parasite Hunter, that's my new nickname for him, came out and attacked Willow with a crowbar. The man who left TNA in a better position than it was in before he became the world champion. I guess he's embraced his dark side now, which made Bram very happy. MVP made a match between Davey Richards and Eddie Edwards, the tag team champions, and said there would have to be a definitive winner. You guys have to fight, or else I'm stripping you of the tag team belts. So they had a match that you would think would tear down the house, but the crowd was dead, and honestly, the match was okay. They only went like 4 minutes. Davey won with a cradle. This wasn't good enough for Kenny King. He came out, he said MVP wanted a definitive winner. He wanted you guys to fight, not exchange wrestling holds. I want to see punches and kicks. So they gave him what he wanted. They beat up Kenny King. Yet another MVP stipulation that's ignored. They're still the tag team champions, as far as I know. You wouldn't think a show featuring Samoa Joe against Austin Aries and Davey Richards against Eddie Edwards could be so boring. But they somehow managed to pull it off. Richards versus Edwards. I mean, that's the kind of match that you save for one of your New York City tapings. And you give them 15 minutes in the main event. Not 4 in a throwaway segment. Robbie E. is apparently terrified of clowns, which means he's terrified of the menagerie because the menagerie has a clown. They were all in the ring together. Zema Ion played his annoying air horn noise. Crazy Steve is squeezing his clown horn. They're having like a horn off here. Somehow this ended up with the Freak, who's Rob Terry under a mask, pressing Zema over his head for like 2 minutes straight while everybody else brawled. And then he dumped him out onto the heels outside of the ring. This was a gigantic waste of time. Mike Tenay and Taz, by the way, they're just like robots. They show no emotion. Taz tries to be funny. Taz is a funny guy. He has his moments, but you can tell these guys, they're not motivated to do anything more than what's written for them on the page in front of them. And really, why would they be? What would give these guys the extra motivation to go out there and be excited about this shit? In the psych ward, Gunner was playing Go Fish with Sam Shaw. Ken Anderson, dressed up as James Storm in what was supposed to be a parody, but it wasn't funny at all. Storm came out, he beat the shit out of Anderson, which I cheered, and then he challenged him to a match at Slammiversary. I didn't think it was possible to hate a babyface more than John Cena, but Anderson proves that theory wrong. I think he may be worse. Angelina Love beat Madison Rayne to retain her Knockouts title after Velvet Sky maced her in the face, or used hairspray or something like that. One or the other. Brittany is probably the hottest looking woman on their roster right now. All props to Velvet Sky, but I think Brittany is a very pretty woman, very attractive. It looks like they're teasing a lesbian gimmick between her and Madison. I didn't see the show last week, so maybe I missed something, but that's what it looks like. You know, and a lesbian angle. Gee, I wonder who came up with that idea. Madison made it clear to Brittany in the back earlier that she was not to interfere in her match later. Don't do anything. So Brittany was out there. She came down, but she didn't do anything. She didn't stop Velvet from, macing Madison or anything like that. And then Madison bitched her out in the back for it after the match. And Brittany just said, listen, I was only doing what you told me to do. You told me not to do anything. So that story is continuing. The main event was a First Blood 8-man tag team match. We had Bully, EY, Aries, and Joe beating MVP, Lashley, Kenny King, and EC3 when EC3 got a small cut on his forehead. There was barely any blood, but it's red, so I guess that was good enough for Earl Hebner. Why even bother having a First Blood match if the blood is so insignificant? If you're going to have a First Blood match, do it right. I think that was EC3's first loss in TNA. They'll probably, dismiss it because he wasn't pinned or tapped out. And yet again, instead of ending the show with their First Blood main event, I know I've talked about this before. Not the first time they've done this. Instead of going off the air with their actual main event, big match like that, we instead go backstage to a Dixie Carter MVP segment with Delusional Dixie, very upset that MVP and his goons beat up her nephew. MVP said that, regimes have rarely been toppled without bloodshed. Then get ready to bleed, Dixie told him. And then the show ended. So I'm supposed to care about two heel authority figures that I don't give a shit about. And again, with this control of TNA bullshit. I feel like every single year of this company's existence, we've been stuck in this never-ending cycle of who has the power in TNA storylines. Who cares? Who cares who has the power in TNA? This show sucked.